Hi, I'm Jacqueline,
And I'm Courtney, and this is Caffeinated Crimes.
recording here live from the Tennessee snowstorm that was a
Mhm.
bit unexpected. Not unexpected that it was going to happen, but that it was going to be this much snow because Tennessee does not typically get this much snow.
Yeah, no, I was telling Kevin, I think it might be the most amount of snow I've ever seen.
That's what Andrew and I were saying too. We're like, I think this is probably, I mean, I like maybe there were a few times as like a very young kid, there were like a few more that were right
I
around
saw some
here,
people
but
saying it was like the most like this much accumulation was like the blizzard of 93 and then
yeah.
94 there was like snow, but not like this much, especially not
Hmm.
like this short a time. Like we got like almost like basically 9 inches in like 24 hours.
Yeah, exactly. Like in one day. Like it started like Sunday night. We like as we were going to bed, we're like, oh, it's starting to come down. And then like it was starting to stick a little bit. And then first thing Monday morning, it's like, oh, we have probably like 4 to 5 inches. And then it snowed literally all day. Like the
Hmm.
entire time we were outside playing, we were like soaked when we came in because it was just like actively snowing the whole time. And yeah, I
Like
measured this
big
morning and it
flakes.
was 9 inches. And I'm like, I've never, this is
It was still
insane.
snowing this morning when I was up.
Yeah.
I was like, is
Like
this
how
ever
long?
gonna stop?
And it's gonna be freezing for a long time. Like we have at least the next 2 days are not gonna get above freezing, and then like a little bit, and then it's gonna drop right back. So I'm like, I feel like I'm gonna be stuck in my house for like 2 weeks because I live at the very top of a hill, so I don't think I'm going
Yeah,
anywhere anytime soon.
probably not. Or you're gonna have to leave your car somewhere at the bottom of
Yeah,
the hill.
exactly.
Um,
We do have a neighbor that drives around like I don't know what they're called. They're not like the golf carts, but like they're the little, they're like the more like
like an ATV.
yeah, something like that. That I keep seeing like coming up and down with like different people. So I don't know if he's like taking people somewhere or if people are just like
Hmm.
driving around or whatever. But you know, if we get desperate, I might be like, hey, can someone drive me down to the main road so I can walk, please?
Yeah. I need some food, please.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just crazy. And like someone told me that yesterday there was like 200 wrecks in Knoxville, which
Yeah.
doesn't surprise me at all because we don't know how to treat the roads and people don't know how
No.
to drive on the roads also. It's just a disaster. But a lot of it was like semi trucks though. A
Yeah.
lot
There
of
were a
like
lot of
semi
like
trucks
big
like
wrecks.
jack knifing.
Yeah.
Okay, almost a jackhammer. I was like, that's not right.
Like that's
Jackknifing.
not it.
And then there was like one fatal one, I know, with like
Yeah.
a semi too. Like,
I know yesterday like several sections of like the interstate and like different like
mm-hmm.
major highways were shut down. So like
Yeah.
yeah, I saw people posting about like asking about places that were open or whatever, and this one girl's like, "Oh, like I'm from Pennsylvania, like this is nothing." And I'm like, "Girl, your roads are treated there. Ours are not. Like this isn't the same."
Yeah.
Like, and I think that's part of the problem is people are like, "Oh, like this isn't that bad." And they go out and they're like, "Oh, the roads are very different than what it is, what
Yeah.
it's
And
like somewhere that gets a lot of snow."
I know like what my dad would always say too, anytime he would drive, he was like, I'm also not worried about myself, but I'm worried about everyone else because
Yeah,
everyone else is out in these like Honda Civics with 5-year-old tires, thinking they
exactly.
can get up hills and stuff. Not that Honda Civics are bad cars, but just like cars like that aren't like an
Aren't made
SUV
for the
or a truck
snow.
or
Yeah,
anything like that. Yeah. Um, but yeah, it's crazy. It's a
yeah,
lot of snow.
it's a lot of snow. It's very pretty though. It's nice to look
Yeah,
at for sure. Well, I don't think we have anything else.
that's about it for me.
Okay, well, I guess we'll just dive on into this one. This one has been on our list, I'm pretty sure since the very beginning. Like
I think so.
when we started this podcast and we just kind of did a quick little like, let's just brain dump like a few ideas and then, you know, almost 4 years later, different things have just come up and, you know, you're gravitated towards different types of cases or things that are like current or you discover, you know, whatever. And this one's just been sitting here this whole time and I was like, you know what? It's 2024. We're going to tackle it. We're going to just jump on
We're
into
gonna
this
do
new
it.
year, getting stuff checked off our list. I feel like it was probably a suggestion, but couldn't tell you who.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you who. Speaking of our list, though, when we first wrote it down, we just wrote Idaho Mom, and that was Lori Vallow. If that tells you
Yeah.
where we were just like Idaho Mom, because it was like a brand new story.
Yeah, because we went back at some point and I was like, who is this supposed to be? And you were like, Lori Vallow. And I was like, oh, wow, I completely forgot that. Because, like, we didn't
Yeah.
even have, like, I mean, I'm sure there was a name, but it wasn't a known name at that time. It
It
was like,
was
oh,
like this
yeah, like,
Idaho case, like we don't
yeah,
really know, like yeah.
exactly. But it's still sitting there, written just like that. So maybe one day. Maybe that'll be 2025's January. We'll
Yeah,
tackle that.
maybe. That's a daunting one and a like kind of ongoing one.
Yeah,
Maybe. I don't know. I feel like they're still like uncovering shit
exactly.
with like other people. So
Yeah, but that
that
one
one's gonna sit there for a while.
that would be like a four-parter probably. There is
Yeah.
a lot to that. But this one that's not going to be a four-parter because unfortunately there's not a ton of information because well, you'll see why, but anyway, so we're just going to get into it. Our sources for this episode include an episode of Murder Maps, which was season 5, episode 7, called The Cleveland Torso Murders, also the Cleveland Police Museum website, and the Unresolved podcast. Several headless bodies started showing up in Cleveland, Ohio between 1934 and 1938. Many of the victims were never identified, and many had been decapitated while they were still alive. There were no apparent connections between the victims, although eventually many agreed that this was the work of a serial killer. The person known as the Cleveland Torso Killer or the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run has never been officially identified. On September 5th, 1934, just before 8 a.m., 34-year-old Frank Legacy was walking along the shore of Lake Erie looking for driftwood to burn. He spotted what he thought was a tree trunk that had washed up on the beach. As he got closer, he realized it was actually the bottom half of a human body. There were knife cuts on her skin, and her skin was like a sort of reddish brown color and kind of like leathery, they said, like a strange texture that appeared to be like some kind of chemical that was put on it, like maybe to preserve it. Legacy called the police and they searched the lake, but they weren't able to find the woman's missing hands or head. She didn't have any identifying marks, and they weren't able to match her to any women who had been recently reported as missing. The county coroner, A.J. Pierce, determined that she had been killed about 6 months before, and clean cuts had been made at her knees and her upper waist, indicating that the killer might be familiar with the human body. A year went by without much luck in discovering the identity of the woman or her killer. She did become known as the Lady of the Lake. And then in September of 1935, so a year later, two teenage boys were playing catch near an industrial wasteland known as Kingsbury Run. So this was once a desirable area of Cleveland, but it had become run down during the Great Depression and was now considered a shanty town, which I couldn't find if that's like a derogatory term. Like it's not like a great term,
Hmm.
but I couldn't find if it was like absolutely don't say this. So I was like, this is what it's considered, but just want to put that out there. This isn't something that we
Yeah.
would call this, but at that time, that's what this was called.
Hmm.
Um, so basically, people who lost everything in the Great Depression relocated to Kingsbury Run, where they set up like shacks, like cardboard, just any kind of like temporary housing. So basically, just like a big kind of park for a bunch of unhoused people. So Cleveland had been a booming city before the Great Depression, but with many out of work and losing their homes, people became desperate. So the boys who were playing catch lost their ball and had to go down a hill to retrieve it. And there they discovered the bodies of two men, just kind of like in the weeds, like not really hidden. Their bodies had been mutilated, including their penises removed, and their heads had been buried nearby. Their bodies had also been drained of blood, and they were naked except for a pair of socks. So they did have rope burns around their wrists, and there were also no signs of blood. So police believed that they had been murdered somewhere else and then dumped here. Because remember, like their bodies were drained of blood. Like it's clear that
Hmm.
they didn't die here. It also wasn't really possible to like drive a car down to the area where the bodies were found. So police know that they're looking for someone who was strong enough to carry these two bodies down the hill. The autopsy showed that one man had been dead over a week and the other approximately 2 to 3 days. So one of the victims was able to be identified as Edward Andrassy by his fingerprints. Andrassy was 29 years old and was well known to the local police. He was an alcoholic, a drug dealer, and he had gotten into several fights, so he had been arrested a few times before. He was also a hospital orderly who lived in Kingsbury Run. So police interviewed his family and friends, but they weren't able to come up with any strong leads. His father did say he disappeared after having an altercation with someone in the mob a few weeks before, but that lead just didn't really pan out. They couldn't find anything to go off of. The other man was determined to be in his 40s, but his identity was unknown. And they both had the same, like, reddish skin color from some kind of chemical, and their cause of death was determined to be decapitation. So, meaning they had been alive when their heads were cut off. Like, that was
Oof.
the method of killing them. Yeah.
Hmm.
And at the time, there was no connection made to the headless woman that had been found nearby a year earlier, which in hindsight, you're like, okay, like, can we not see? But it's a whole year. That woman
Mm-hmm.
appeared to have been killed like 6 months before that. So, I can see why it wasn't an immediate, hey,
Yeah.
these might be connected. But at this time, Cleveland's police force was known to be very corrupt and had been accepting bribes during and after Prohibition. They were also understaffed and poorly trained, which did contribute to Cleveland's growing crime problem in the 1930s.
I was about to ask that too. Like, did this not get connected because there's so much crime going on? Not that,
Yeah,
but like whenever you have, like, I don't know, whenever you have somewhere where it's like everyone is suddenly fallen into like poverty, crime
exactly.
rates do rise.
Yeah,
Like, it
absolutely.
happens. So they're probably like, we're just trying to survive
Yeah,
here.
like they didn't have enough
Yeah.
people. Like I said, they weren't trained. Yeah, there was a very increased crime problem in Cleveland in this time after the Great Depression, during the Great Depression. Also Prohibition, where they're taking all these bribes, and then even after like Prohibition was like reversed, like there were still like they were still taking bribes for illegal operations that were continuing that like went above and
Mm-hmm.
beyond like what, like moonshine and things like that. So just there's
Yeah.
so much happening in Cleveland at
Yeah.
this time. A lot of corruption and yeah, I'm sure the increasing crime and just not having enough police officers contributed to this connection not being made.
Mm-hmm.
So the new mayor, Harold Burton, was elected in the fall of 1935, and one of his top priorities was finding a law enforcement officer to be Cleveland's new public safety director. So this position would oversee both the police and fire departments. So again, looking for someone to just kind of take over, like turn this all around. So 31-year-old Elliot Ness was part of the police unit in Chicago that was responsible for dismantling illegal alcohol operations, including Al Capone's. So he was like a pretty big figure in law enforcement at this time.
Mm-hmm.
And in 1933, Ness was transferred from Chicago to Cincinnati as the assistant investigator in charge of the Cincinnati Alcohol Tax Unit. And Mayor Burton reached out to offer Ness the public safety director position in December of 1935. So he came in ready to like bust up more illegal operations and just like dismantle this corrupt police workforce in Cleveland. On January 26, 1936, a barking dog behind Hart Manufacturing alerted a woman who went to investigate. So the dog was trying to get to these like two baskets that were outside. And after looking inside the basket, the woman walked to the nearby butcher shop and told the owner that there were a couple of baskets of ham in the alley.
I'm
Which,
guessing it's not ham.
yeah, since this is not a butcher podcast, I think you can assume that it is not
Mm-hmm.
ham in this basket. So the owner thought that someone had like robbed him, like, oh, like someone like stole my ham and like left it outside or something. But when he went outside to look, he noticed that the meat inside the basket was not ham, but parts of a human body. So a female torso, arms, and legs had been wrapped inside newspaper inside the baskets. Her reproductive organs had been removed like very precisely. And when the snow melted a few weeks later, additional body parts were found a few blocks away, but the woman's head was never found. Because her hands had been left inside the basket, police were able to confirm the woman's identity through her fingerprints. So Florence Polillo was 42 years old. She was a part-time sex worker, barmaid, and housewife. She had previously lived in Buffalo and Erie and had been married twice. She did have a few criminal charges related to liquor, which is how the police had her fingerprints on file. Her cause of death was determined to be decapitation, but then the killer waited for rigor mortis to set in before dismembering the rest of her body. So clearly like a long process here.
Mm-hmm.
On June 5th, 1936, two boys had skipped school to go fishing when they noticed a bundle of clothing under a tree in Kingsbury Run. They unwrapped the clothing to see if anything was inside, and the decapitated head of a young man rolled out. So these kids are never skipping school ever again. They're like, I'll just go
No,
to
I
school.
would
It's
not.
fine.
I was also thinking of that woman earlier who was like, there's a ham in the alley. I'd be like, I'm never eating ham ever again.
No, oh no, oh no,
Never again.
definitely not. So the boys ran home to tell their mothers, who called the police. The rest of the man's body was found the next day, a few hundred yards away in front of the Nickel Plate Railroad Police Building. His penis had been cut off, the blood had been drained from his body, and it was covered in the same chemical as the other bodies. The man was young with several distinctive tattoos, but his fingerprints weren't on file. A photograph of the man's head was published in the newspaper to see if anyone could identify him, and his actual head was also displayed at the morgue for like people to come by and look at him to see if they knew him. So just like the literal physical decapitated head. Like, sure, come on and look and see if you know this guy.
This reeks of the
Ooh,
1930s.
yeah, definitely. But no one was able to identify him. And at this time, like heavy tattoos were associated with sailors, criminals, or people from like other countries. So the police are wondering if like other criminals in the area do recognize him, but they're criminals, so they're not willing to like come forward. But it would be unusual
Hmm.
for someone to like be so heavily tattooed in the 1930s.
Yeah, I feel like tattoos are like definitely a more modern thing. Like
Yeah.
even I know like my parents' generation like
Yeah.
thought tattoos were like trashy or you know what I
Yeah.
mean, like
Hmm.
really heavily frowned upon. So I'm sure in the 1930s it was like even more so
Like
like, oh,
something is
there's a
wrong with you if you have
yeah.
tattoos. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Not definitely, but definitely that's how they, you know what I'm saying. Anyway, and the newspapers started calling the murderer the Butcher of Kingsbury Run. Now, to tie in my love of World's Fairs, I brought it back, guys. I
Oh
just
my
brought him
gosh, she's
back.
never gonna stop with world fairs. Every episode for the rest of time is somehow gonna link back to a world fair.
I need to tell you a story very quickly.
Okay.
I apologize for this side story. I was devastated when I learned this. So Andrew went to Walgreens. I don't remember what he was there for, but like a few days later, he brought it up and he was like, "Oh yeah, like they had this really cool book that was like all about the Knoxville World's Fair and had all these pictures and everything. I was gonna get it for you, but it was like $25, so I didn't." Like,
Okay, I meant to tell you a story too. So I'm so sorry, listeners. But so my parents have been cleaning out, and my dad found from the original World's Fair, like the little book pamphlet that was like the map and
wow,
telling you everything that was in there.
I
And I was like,
love it.
Jacqueline would go wild. But it was
That's
just
so
like he said it was like
cool.
a little book magazine you could look through that shows like the map of like where
Okay,
everything is.
as soon as I can get out of my house in like 3 weeks when the snow melts, I'm gonna go to your parents' house and I need to look at
And
this.
look
I'll
at that.
wear my mom's 82 World's Fair shirt that I have. I'll wear it and
Hmm.
I'll look at it and I'll go buy myself the damn book that my husband would not. But I,
And if they and when they open in 3 weeks, the vintage store down the street from my house has so much World's Fair
oh,
stuff.
cool.
So much
Okay.
World's Fair
We'll
stuff.
make a day of
Anyway,
it. I'm excited.
sorry.
Anyway, yeah, so but I was like, you thought of me and that was so sweet. And then you're like, no, it's not worth $25. Wow. Anyway. But so, and this isn't even actually a World's Fair, but it kind of is. So, but Elliot Ness also had this man's like plaster death mask and like a map of like his body art. So, like a map of his body and like where his tattoos are and what they looked like and everything. So, he had those displayed at the Great Lakes Exposition. So, this exposition wasn't one of the official World's Fairs, which if you listen to that episode, we talked about, you know, how that whole thing
Hmm.
works. But it was like the same style of exhibition. So that's what they were going for. It just wasn't like declared an official World's Fair. So they just had like this man's death mask and his tattoos like displayed. Like maybe somebody will recognize him. Like there's so many people. There were over
Hmm.
100,000 visitors, but still no one identified this man. So Peter Merlot and Martin Zalewski were assigned to these cases full time, but Elliot Ness was still overseeing an investigation as well. So now we kind of got like two separate-ish investigations going on. Not really what you want, but okay. In July of 1936, another headless body of a man was found in the woods by a teenage girl. The man had been dead approximately 2 months and was roughly 40 years old. His body and bloody clothing were found nearby, and there was a large amount of blood that had like seeped into the ground, so it did appear that he was killed where he was found. On September 10th, 1936, a man was running to catch a train when he saw a body floating in a nearby cesspool. Some sources say he like tripped over a body part as well, so not sure if that actually happened, if that was kind of added to embellish the story. Never really know. But the police were called, and many spectators watched the body being pulled out of the water. The man's upper body and extremities were intact, but his penis had been cut off, the blood had been drained from his body, and his head was never found. So it's horrific enough to like imagine just a group of people watching a body being pulled out of a lake, but a body in that condition that like
Hmm.
some sources say like hundreds of people were watching. Wow.
Whew.
So the man was estimated to be in his late 20s, and the cause of death was decapitation. And police still had no leads, and the public and media were really starting to get upset because there's like so many unsolved murders that are now clearly the work of one killer. And they're like, we really need y'all to like do something about this because a bunch of people are dying and
Yeah.
nothing is happening, and people are getting really upset.
Yeah. So the county coroner released a statement to the press that said, quote, "The killer is apparently a sex maniac of the sadistic type. This is indicated by the condition of his victims. He's probably a muscular man. The slayer definitely has expert knowledge of human anatomy. The incisions of his knife are clean and were made in each case without guesswork. He may have gathered his knowledge of anatomy as a medical student, or it is possible that he is a butcher." And so this statement only enraged and terrified the public more because they're like, okay, so he's a sex maniac of the sadistic type. He's muscular and he's really knowledgeable and knows what he's doing. Um, so yeah, I'm even more scared than before.
Yeah, right. You're like, oh, okay, thank you for that statement.
Yeah, thank you. I feel so much better now.
Yeah.
So on September 15th, the police called an emergency conference with more than 30 detectives and scientists and gathered at the central police station to share theories about the killer, and the press were invited along to watch. They believed the murderer knew the area well. And at this time, Ness and Merlot were basically conducting separate investigations and didn't always share everything with each other, which we see commonly and is never a good idea.
And this is
So,
even in the same jurisdiction. Like this isn't
yeah.
even like different police departments in different cities and like, oh, they didn't communicate. They're all in the
Hmm.
same area. Like these people both work for the same police department.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
So on February 23rd, 1937, the upper torso of another unidentified woman washed up on the shore of Beulah Park Beach along Lake Erie. She was already dead when her head was cut off, unlike the other victims. The lower half of her body was found 3 months later around East 30th Street, and she was estimated to be in her mid 20s. On June 6, 1937, a human skull and a burlap sack that contained the bones of a Black woman were found under the Lorraine Carnegie Bridge near downtown Cleveland. The coroner determined that she'd been dead for more than a year, and she was able to be identified as Rose Wallace through some unique dental work. She was a sex worker, and a month later, the National Guard had been called in because of labor problems in the flats. And a guardsman was standing watch by the West 3rd Street Bridge when he saw a body part floating in the Cuyahoga River. So the entire body, except for the head, was recovered in the days that followed, and the victim was male, estimated to be in his mid to late 30s. All internal organs, except for his lungs, have been removed. Which I feel like this is weird too for like serial killers. They mostly target like same race, same sex,
Mm-hmm.
and this is just like all over the place.
All over the place. Like you have like,
Ages,
yeah,
sexes, races, everything.
exactly. Yeah, very, very interesting for a serial killer.
So in March of 1938, a man was walking his dog in Sandusky, which is about 60 miles from Cleveland, when the dog came running out of the woods with a human leg in his mouth. The local coroner contacted police, David Cowles, who is the head of Cleveland's Scientific Identification Bureau, and he went to investigate. Cowles had also been an informant in Osborne State Prison who was talking about a man named Francis Sweeney. So, Sweeney was a doctor in Cleveland who had a drinking problem and often checked himself into rehab at a facility in Sandusky. So, the next month in April, the torso of a female victim washed up on the banks of the Cuyahoga River in two burlap bags. This was the first time that the coroner noted drugs found in the body. Ness was aware of Francis Sweeney and had been keeping an eye on him, but the problem was Sweeney's cousin was a congressman in Ohio who'd been publicly criticizing Ness and the mayor for their handling of the torso cases. So Ness made the decision to have Sweeney kidnapped from a downtown street corner and taken to a suite at the Cleveland Hotel. In case you're wondering, no, I assume this is not legal.
No, it is absolutely not.
Yeah. So Francis Sweeney was a World War I veteran who appeared to suffer from PTSD and nerve damage from his time in the war, so I'm sure he did not handle being kidnapped well. Sure, that was very triggering.
Right? Uh-huh.
He was born in 1894 and went to medical school and started practicing medicine around 26, 27 years old. His wife tried twice to have him committed to a psychiatric institution before filing for divorce in 1934. She told the courts he neglected his medical practice, drank excessively, and disappeared for days at a time. Ness kept Sweeney in the hotel room for over a week, interrogating him. First, he had to detox because he'd been highly intoxicated when they kidnapped him. And David Cowles was also present in the hotel room. And both believed that Sweeney was their man, but he wouldn't confess. He supposedly failed polygraph tests, but we know those aren't reliable. And it was also very new technology at the time. So I'm sure probably a lot of people didn't even know how to use it.
Exactly. And
Um,
also, like, this man has PTSD and has been kidnapped off the damn street, so I can imagine that his vital signs are a little out of whack.
and is detoxing from being drunk, and I'm sure
Right.
going through withdrawals because he's a
Yes.
chronic alcoholic. Like,
So I think his body's doing lots of things that are
it's
probably being picked up on that lie detector test.
it's a miracle they didn't kill him
Right?
by forcing him to detox. Like, people die that way by forcing them
Exactly.
to abruptly cold turkey detox. I
Oh
don't know
my
how common it
gosh.
is with alcohol, but
Yeah,
I'm sure he was extremely sick.
exactly.
He was also supposedly beaten by detectives in an attempt to get him to confess, but he never did, and they eventually had to let him go. And because of the unorthodox way he was questioned, there's no public record of this interrogation, and it was decades before Sweeney's name was released as a possible suspect in the Torso murders. And he was often referred to as Dr. X before his actual name was released. On August 16th, 1938, three people were looking for goods at a dump site when they discovered the torso of a woman. She was wrapped in a blue men's blazer and a threadbare quilt. Her legs and arms were discovered in a makeshift box nearby, and it was also believed that the body parts had been refrigerated. And when police were searching the area, they also discovered a man's torso. Both of these bodies were in view of Elliot Ness's office. So
If that's not a like, fuck you, I don't know what
yeah, I
is.
don't know what is. And so 2 days later, on August 18th, Ness led a raid on Kingsbury Run. He supposedly wanted to get rid of the killer's hunting ground. Now, remember, Kingsbury Run was essentially a camp for unhoused individuals who had nowhere else to go. So Ness arrested and held 63 individuals for various petty criminal acts, and he then burned the entire area to the ground, destroying the temporary housing of at least 300 unhoused individuals.
Just uh like I literally like my mouth fell to the floor when I read this. I'm like,
Hmm.
how, why, what?
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, like I was just this is where he was getting his victims, so I just thought I'd get rid of the victims. Like what?
Look, listen, I don't want you guys to die. I'm just gonna burn your
Exactly. Oh,
home that
I
you
don't
have
want you
right
guys to
now.
keep dying. I'm gonna arrest you and burn your house to the ground. Okay.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thanks for the help.
Thanks. And this would contribute to a housing problem in Cleveland for years to come. And in the days that followed, he ordered searches of the surrounding houses. Fire wardens were allowed to search properties without search warrants. So Ness paired his team of detectives with a fire warden for each house to illegally conduct searches for any signs of the murderer. Um, the press found out about these searches, so they were soon called off. But I'm like, I know it's the 1930s, but you're doing all this so illegally and corruptly that how do you think you're
Hmm.
ever going to get a conviction?
Yeah. And this is the man who was brought in to dismantle the corruption of this workforce,
Hmm.
is the one who's doing all
He just had
this.
a different form of corruption.
Yeah. Yeah.
So 2 weeks later, Francis Sweeney checked himself back into rehab slash a veterans hospital. Sources kind of differ, but they could have possibly been the same thing. Um, and the murders appeared to stop after this, at least in this area. Or at least they weren't finding bodies.
Yeah.
I mean, in July of 1939, police arrested 54-year-old bricklayer Frank Dolezal. So Dolezal had lived with Flo Polillo in the early 1930s and knew both Rose Wallace and Edward Andrassy as well. So detectives allegedly beat Dolezal until he confessed to Flo's murder. He recanted a few days later, and he was found dead in his jail cell in August from an apparent suicide, but many believe he was murdered. He was only 5'8", and the hook he was hanging from was shorter than he was, so doesn't really, you know.
Yeah.
He also did not have any known skills that would contribute to the dismembering of the bodies. By June of 1940, there were believed to be 14 victims of the Cleveland torso killer. Many of the victims were likely unhoused and remained unidentified today. Peter Merlot started riding trains through poor areas just to see if he could identify any suspects or other likely victims. An unhoused man named Emil Fronick said he had been wandering around downtown Cleveland in November of 1934 when a doctor approached him and offered him a meal and a new pair of shoes. So Emil went to the doctor's office, but started to feel lightheaded after eating. He was able to run away and ended up on a train and slept for 3 days before regaining full consciousness. So whatever was in that food was strong.
Yeah.
He went back to try to find the doctor's office, but wasn't able to find it. Many believe the office he described could match Sweeney's office, and investigators drove Emil around hoping he could identify the office, but he couldn't. In the 1950s, Elliot Ness started receiving postcards that were signed F.E. Sweeney, Paranoidal Nemesis, and taunted him for not being able to catch the killer. So Ness's reputation as an honest and honorable policeman would never recover from his raid and destruction of Kingsbury Run. Like that is a career,
Yeah,
like that's what people are going to remember you for.
exactly.
He was divorced a few times and ended up leaving town after trying to cover up his own drunk driving arrest.
Again,
And
another one that'll just kind of.
yeah, Elliot Ness died of a heart attack in his home in 1957. Francis Sweeney had been found sane following 2 court-ordered psychiatric evaluations in 1938, but was eventually diagnosed as being schizophrenic in 1956, and he remained in the rehab/veterans hospital for a year starting in 1938 and died in 1964. So these are the murders of the Cleveland Torso Killer or the Butcher of Kingsbury Run. Only 3 who have ever been identified: Edward Andrassy, Rose Wallace, and Florence Polillo.
Yeah, this one is, I mean, obviously just all kinds of disturbing.
Mhm.
But also like Francis Sweeney is like the only suspect, but I'm like, there's not really, I mean, like, yeah, everything
Yeah.
sounds great and lines up, but you don't have anything like definitive. Like, you can't even prove that he like knew any of these people. He had no connections
Hmm.
to them. You didn't find any smoking guns. You didn't find any like a murder chamber room. Like, he clearly has to have somewhere where he is like doing this and then
Yeah.
transporting these bodies. I don't know. It just, and like Elliot Ness receiving the notes that are like signed like F.B. Sweeney. It's like, well, yeah, I'm sure people around town know that you kidnapped this man and held him in a
Yeah.
hotel
It could
for
have
a
been
week.
anybody.
Yeah, like I'm sure even though his name wasn't like publicly released, I mean, someone would have known who could have been sending those cards. Like, I don't think that's anything that's definitive.
I also don't feel like Elliot Ness is a reliable narrator. Who knows that he
True.
wasn't sending it to himself.
Mhm.
I
Accurate.
also feel like the survivor who was offered a warm meal and then was drugged and got away. I'm not saying I think it's Francis Sweeney is the doctor, but I'm
Hmm.
like, that could make sense. Like, because we know
Yeah.
it's probably a doctor or someone with anatomy
Yeah.
luring, seems like mostly like unhoused individuals
Hmm.
or those of like poor income, like perfect way to
Yeah.
like draw them in.
Absolutely.
I think that would make a lot of sense on how they're like getting people without like raising a lot of concern.
I mean, especially because like this is the 30s, like people are hungry. And if you're like, oh, like I can
Yeah.
give you a meal, like you're a doctor, like people trust doctors. Like, oh, are you
Mm-hmm.
sick? Like I can like give you some medicine. I can, like anything like that. Like it definitely makes sense. And I mean, that man also didn't like positively identify Sweeney, so it could have been like another doctor in the area who was like
Yeah,
doing
that's
this and
yeah,
you know,
exactly. Like I'm not saying it's necessarily
yeah,
Sweeney,
yeah.
but I do think the story of like possibly how people were being lured in like makes a
Mm-hmm.
lot of sense, especially like sex workers. Like you
Yeah.
are like, oh, here's money, like come back to my office, you
Mm-hmm.
know.
And your office would be an I don't want to say ideal place, but would be a sufficient location to dismember bodies in this manner
Mm-hmm.
and be able to get away with it a little easier, you
Yeah.
know? Yeah, for sure. But
Yeah.
crazy that such a brutal one and so many years later and still no, still nothing. But and I don't think even for something that old, I don't think DNA would even do anything at this point. Like we're seeing a lot of cases from
Mm-hmm.
like the 70s, 80s. There was like one, I think, in the late 60s that are starting to be solved now with like genealogy, DNA and stuff. But the 1930s, like I don't think they would have preserved anything well enough to be able to, even if there
And
was
I
something
also
to preserve.
wonder, so yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like so many of these bodies have been out, people
Exactly.
have stumbled across them. Who knows who,
That chemical that was used like all
hmm
over, like who knows what that destroyed. Yeah, like
like I'm sure if they're draining all the blood, they're knowing how to like do some form of cleaning or something. You know what I'm
yeah.
saying? Like, yeah,
Like there are a lot
crazy.
of cases that I feel like someday are going to be solved with DNA and with different stuff. This one, I don't know. I don't see it ever being solved, honestly.
Yeah, not unless there was some deathbed confession passed down among family.
Yeah.
Someone finds something in their grandparents'
Hmm.
basement going through stuff, and they're like, "What is this?" Um,
Yeah. But even then, I mean, you have people that like give fake, deathbed
hmm
confessions because we've seen that before where someone confessed and then it turns out it wasn't them, but now they're dead. So you can't even ask them, like, why did you confess to this thing you didn't do? And who
Yeah.
knows? Yeah. But I'm glad we finally
Yeah.
got to this one. It's
hmm
definitely been there for a while. Glad we were able to share this story. Unfortunately, like we said, we don't have much information about the victims. Like most of them, we don't even have their names. The few
hmm
here that we did have their names, we had like one sentence of information about them and not the best information about them. Like we had like what the police knew about them, which is the only reason they were identified because their fingerprints were on file for criminal charges. And that's the only information we have about who they were as a person, which is very, very unfortunate.
Yeah. So sad.
So, yeah, very sad. That being said, Courtney, what's your perk of the week?
So my perk of the week is, I'm sure a few months ago, my perk of the week was the ACOTAR series by Sarah J.
Hmm.
Moss. Sorry, Sarah, I don't know which one it is. But now I am reading the Throne of Glass series. I'm diving further into the
Jump on in.
universe, the multi-book universe.
Hmm.
And I really like it so far. Me and my sister are trying to read it together, and she's just taken off and left me in the dust. So
Yeah, she
she's gonna
tends to
need
do
to
that with books. Like she is,
she's gonna need
it
to
blows
slow
my
down.
mind. Yeah.
I know. Well, she texted me one day and was like, I accidentally stayed up till 3 a.m. finishing this book. I was like,
That
fair
explains
enough.
it.
Yeah, but I'm excited. I don't know if we talked about it on the podcast of how many different ways there is to read this book, where to read
Hmm.
one of the certain books. There's a tandem read. It's really intimidating, but I'm in it and we're going, and I really like them so far. And I
Are
hear
you
they only
doing
get better.
are you doing the strange read, not the strange, but like are you
The
reading them like
tandem.
book by book or are you doing the tandem and the start here and go back and
Okay, yeah, so there's only two books that you do like a tandem read
okay,
with.
okay.
So not all the books, that would be a lot.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so basically what it is there was a prequel written, but it was
Hmm.
not released until like four books were already out. So that's
Mm.
kind of where like people are like, oh, you should read it first. It's a prequel. But other
Hmm.
people are like, no, you should read it at this point. That's when it was published. It has
Yeah.
more of an impact. Like just kind of debates on where to read it. So I kind of just chose a random spot that I thought
Hmm.
sounded good. You just have to read it before a certain book. Basically, you have to
Okay.
read it
Gotcha.
within the first four. You have to read it before
Okay.
the fifth,
Okay. Gotcha.
basically. And then it's like two of the last books, but basically they take place at the same time. You just follow two different sets of
Hmm.
characters.
Okay. Okay.
And so some people don't like it
Interesting.
because one of the books they don't like the set of characters as much. And
Okay.
also one of the first book ends on a cliffhanger. So then like you're on a
Mm,
cliffhanger and then you have to go back and read
I
800 more
gotcha.
pages of everything you were just reading across the world.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. I can see how that would be
Yeah.
frustrating. Okay.
So I'm definitely going to do the tandem read.
Yeah.
I'm intimidated, but I'm like planning how I'm
Yeah.
going to do it. We're going to do a lot of sticky notes telling me when to flip back and forth. And I'm excited for it. I've never done
Yeah,
anything like it, so I'm
that sounds
excited.
fun. I like it. Nice.
But that's my perk of the week is this series. So can't wait to finish it and then go on to Crescent City and then probably reread ACOTAR at some point. But
I still need to read ACOTAR for the first time, so maybe I'll get there once,
yes.
like I do. Like a month ago, I put like 20 books on hold for ebooks, and now they're all just like literally flying
All
at my
coming up.
face.
Yep.
I don't know why I keep doing this to myself, but here I
Yeah.
am, just
Here you are.
New
I do
Year,
have the
same me.
books. I'll just when you come out of your house in 3 weeks and finish all those books, I'll let you borrow them.
True, true, perfect.
But that is my perk of the week. Jacqueline, what is your perk of the week?
So my perk of the week is that this weekend, Andrew and I got a little like impromptu, unplanned date night. So my father-in-law was like bringing a tool over that we were going to use this weekend to do a backsplash, but now I don't think we're going to make it to Lowe's by this weekend. So at some point in the next few months,
Mm-hmm.
um, so we brought that over, and then like he was just hanging out for a little bit, and then Billy kept saying like, "Oh, can I go have a sleepover at Pappy's house?" So he's like, "Okay, come on," and so just packed her bag and off she went. And so it was like
Yeah.
6 o'clock, and we're just sitting there like, okay, what do we do now? Like we didn't plan on having, the night to ourselves. So we went to one of our favorite local breweries and had dinner there. And then I texted Courtney and see where she was at. And then we met up with her and had some drinks and watched some football and just had a good time.
Mm-hmm.
It was nice. It was relaxing
Yeah.
and
It was fun.
rejuvenating.
It was nice. Before
Yeah.
all the snow hit, you got to have some
Yes.
social interaction
I
outside the
was thinking that
house.
too. I was like, got to have one nice night out before we're stuck in our house forever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and also, like I've said probably 432 times in the last year, just one of those nice little reminders of like, just so glad that we're here. And then I got to, like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, what are you doing? Okay, cool, let's meet up. And it's like, oh, we didn't have to plan for 3 months and drive 8 hours and take vacation
Yeah.
and do a whole thing. So
Yeah.
that's my perk of the week. If you guys want to tell us your perks of the week, how much snow do you have? Are you laughing at us Southerners being overwhelmed with
Mm-hmm.
these 9 inches of snow? Do you want 9 inches of snow? What are your thoughts on ACOTAR? But just send that to Courtney because I haven't read it. Courtney is looking at me like I said something funny. I don't
No,
know
I'm
if I should.
laughing because you're like, do you want 9 inches? And so I was like,
Whoops. Yeah, just answer that
oh,
question appropriately and please don't answer inappropriately. Thank you.
please do not answer that question with a picture.
Yeah,
That's
like
all
we
I
do not
ask.
need any photographic evidence of your answer to that question. I don't even know where I was going with that, but you know where we're at on all the places. Let us know your thoughts on this case. Do you think it was Sweeney? Have you heard any other suspects that you think it could be? I couldn't really find any others that are even talked about. So let us know your thoughts. We are also on patreon.com/caffeinated crimes, which as you were hearing this week, we have a bonus episode coming out.
Yes.
I think, yes.
Yes, that's
So
correct.
that
I
is
was like,
our
what day
annual,
is it?
I don't know. That is our annual yearly recap. So we have
Mm-hmm.
10 like major true crime, like, updates, cases, stories, whatever from 2023. So if you want to remember all of the stuff that happened in 2023, because there was a lot in
There's
the true crime
stuff I
world.
forgot.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
same. It's been a whole year, so But come join us on patreon.com/caffeinated crimes. We also got a backlog of like 40 other episodes that
Mm-hmm.
you guys can listen to and can join our Discord and chat with us in real time about these cases. All kinds of fun stuff.
You can get a pin and sticker. I don't know when I can mail it out, but it'll at some point.
Yes, eventually.
Uh, And if you wouldn't mind to do us a huge, huge favor, and please make sure you are subscribed on whatever platform and that you give us 5 stars, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen. If you're on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, leave us a nice comment, subscribe, all of that good stuff. And in the meantime, go have a cup of coffee.
And don't commit a crime.